This is the Open University.
But beware, this is not the real Open University, but a synthetic and mendacious Open University devised by Momus, a Scottish electronic folk singer.
Good afternoon and welcome back to the Open University, and today I'm going to be a kind of Sir Kenneth Clark, presenting you with a little civilization, or rather a rumination on iconography and iconoclasm, because this is going to be all about my new album's artwork. Therefore it's about graphic design, but it's so much more than that because it's about culture. I've come here to l'Église de Saint-Eustache, which is in Les Halles in Paris in the first arrondissement, and was completed in 1633, although started 100 years before that. And it contains, amongst other interesting things, the tomb of Scaramouche, who was an Italian comic actor, real name Tiberio Fiorelli. And Brian Eno used to be described as the Scaramouche of the synthesizer. So I've come to pay my respects, not just to Scaramouche and to synthesizers, but to the iconography that you see in a church, because of course the Christian church has always been very good at using the best artists, the best musicians, the best architects to promote its agenda. One doesn't have to share the agenda to find churches beautiful, especially when the sun is shining through the stained glass windows. I'm personally fascinated by the technology of churches, those funny speakers they hang on the walls, which are much longer than any speakers you would see elsewhere, or the strange videos of the pegboard with the little hooks and little texts hanging off the hooks. And this church actually has some kind of advanced art and sculpture in it as well, about homeless people and about the charity work they do. But we're here to look at why the church has used for centuries stained glass and other iconography, and what iconography is. So when you make an album cover, you're really trying to communicate, just like the church was trying to communicate the teachings of Jesus, using stained glass and music and other things. You're trying to communicate the ideas that start the album and that are coursing through the album like a school of dolphins, leaping with the sheer joy of being alive. So this album, it really started with me trying to make a song to tell people not to vote for Trump back in November of last year, a song called Orange Pills. I wanted to do a bossa nova style record, and I just bought an acoustic guitar in Paris in a flea market. So I wanted to do something very guitar-oriented, but not necessarily to renounce or give up the AI experiments I've been doing. So when I make songs and release them, I always do a video, a sort of scratch video, and the first video sort of showed the CBS News season in 1974 for Orange Pills, and then I found this kind of Trump-like doctor figure who was in an animation, again from about 1974, put together a video using basically the 70s television I used to watch from the US, which was familiar and wholesome and reassuring compared with the kind of thing, the monster that the US has now become under Trump, just to point up that contrast. The next video I made was for Love Yourself. It's really, the video shows Miho Nakayama, who had just died actually. So believe it or not, the first album title I came up with was Pleasure Puzzle, because I'd just written the song 30,000 Nights, which has this line in it about the pleasure puzzle of my 30,000 days and nights, because that's what you have. If you live into your early 80s, you'll have about 30,000 days of life. And in the song, I see it as a kind of labyrinth, a pleasant labyrinth in which it's nice to get lost. That didn't last very long, because I came up with quietism as the next sleeve concept. It was based on the song Quietism, which is kind of taking the theme. Should one be an activist? Given that Trump had by now won the election, we all have to be activists against his agenda. But at the same time, the temptation is very strong to be a quietist. So that sort of proposed the major dimension of the concepts in the album, which is that between quietism and activism. So the first visual idea I had was, well, there's this album Quiet Life by Japan, in which David Sylvian is seen on the cover raising his hand and looking away, simultaneously inviting attention and denying attention. So it's a bit like a celebrity who's confronted by the paparazzi, someone who relies on a certain public profile, but at the same time wants to control the monster of fame and choose when to turn it on, when to turn it off, which you can't always do. Fame is, in a sense, iconoclastic because it destroys its subjects. People who get famous tend to be destroyed by their fame, to die young, to become addicts, to become monsters of one kind or another. But it also permits them and allows them, makes everything possible. So it's an iconography, but it's also an iconoclasm. And when you think about different types of pop stars, I think often of David Bowie and Sylvian as kind of contrasts, although Sylvian was influenced a great deal, took his name from a Bowie song. They were really contrasts because Sylvian is kind of embarked on a mission to make iconography, a basically religious mission, around the image of himself as an artist, himself as an introvert, himself as sensitive and spiritual. There's a lot of religious iconography in Japan and Sylvian imagery. Whereas Bowie tended to play with ripping up his own image, smashing his own previous images. You see it on Scary Monsters. You see it on Heathen, actually, which is a very interesting case study designed by Jonathan Barnbrook, using a lot of scribbled out medieval and Renaissance paintings with kind of knife slashes and paint spatters. Guido Reni's Massacre of the Innocents, Duccio de Buonsenga's Madonna and Child with Six Angels. And this is all kind of in relation to 9/11 and America being smashed up by jets and terrorism and stuff. Carlo Dolci's Magdalene and Rubens's Christ and St. John with Angels. So these are all kind of torn up and attacked with knives. And there's also a San Sebastian by Raffaello Sanzio. You know, it's kind of an iconoclasm, which is in itself a way to look at violence happening to imagery, or the sexiness of violence happening in imagery. Rather than mere reverence, we should have a kind of creative destruction, rip things up and start again. So there were some great reactions to the pastiche and spoof Japan cover for Quietism, with me, just a photograph I snapped on the street outside the Pompidou Centre. Itself a cathedral of imagery and iconoclasm and iconography, if you like. People seemed as impressed, actually, on my Bandcamp, for instance, by the sleeve pastiche as they were by the music. So that was slightly worrying to me, because it was fairly quickly done, and also, you know, I could be sued for coming a bit too close to the Japan sleeve. And I didn't really want that to be the final sleeve anyway. Interestingly enough, what does survive of that mock sleeve is in the final CD itself, on the physical object, I put a kind of amalgam of Keiichi Tanami, an arm in a kind of salute, raised, or not a salute, but like a kind of raised gesture like the one David Sylvian makes on Quiet Life. And it's a Picasso head with a huge ear. So quietism, the idea of you can't, if you had such an enormous ear, you wouldn't be able to live a quiet life. You'd be hearing everything all the time. It would be like the rays on the final cover, sort of rays of attacks, really, of the current order. It struck me, actually, looking at that design on the CD, that it's a bit like the Elon Musk fascist salute, which he made during the inauguration. And actually, I did go out and try to reproduce David Sylvian's pose in the Jardin des Plantes in Paris. And I found, my girlfriend was saying, listen, you look like you're doing a fascist salute. Stop doing it. You know, you're in public here. This looks like you're kind of a Musk supporter or a Hitler supporter directly. So it's interesting that kind of survives in that gesture that's only on the CD. But anyway, that first idea for the sleeve got scrapped pretty quickly. And luckily, November wasn't only a tragic month in terms of what the political developments in the States were bringing. Personally, I had a very nice November because me and Naomi went to Barcelona. And one of the things we did was we went to the Design Museum. And there's a place in there, a library called the Disegni Hub, where we love to sit and browse the magazines and get ideas. So I found this amazing book there called Illustration in Japan, the sort of annual from 1978, which had on the cover this fantastic image drawn by Keiichi Tanami, who just died actually in August of 2024. And he was one of the great generation of Japanese pop artists, along with Yoko Tadanori and a couple of others. And I really love this kind of image of it's spread out over the front and the back covers of this illustration annual, because it showed these weird kind of pop art superheroes in kind of Mexican wrestling masks, sat around a conference table. One of them is like the lion from The Wizard of Oz, and he's spewing some coffee. What I love is that it's all seen from 45 degrees, which is a sort of typical traditional Japanese angle to view scenes, especially banqueting scenes from. If it were a Western image, you might say it's the Last Supper or something, but it's not. It's more like a Japanese image about Western culture as seen from Japan in a kind of weird mixed up way, in which superheroes, kind of mixing Western and Marvel kind of superheroes with the kind of weird characters you'd get in Japanese post-war manga. And then these Mexican wrestling masks. But it's all seen, the red table, which is the central motif around which they're all seated, like a Dr. Evil kind of conference, is kind of seen from this angle above, which allows the characters to be splayed out. So you're kind of almost looking through a wide-angle lens, and they're all splayed out. The lion is kind of tipping backwards as he spits his coffee. Then these other characters, who all look a bit like weird sea creatures, are ranged round in various positions with various weapons and things, as if they're going to save the world from something. I don't know, John Robinson, the noted Momus expert, said that he thought it was some people in a restaurant arguing about the bill. For me, it's because I've put these attacking kind of shards around it, another manga device actually. It looks as if these are people trying to decide, a bit like the European Union having an emergency meeting trying to decide what to do if Trump wins the election, which they actually did. And now they're in disarray because they can't quite decide how to deal with the tariffs and the aggression and the fact that Trump is going to seize Greenland and all the rest of it. So it looks like people, kind of reminds me of the Skoberlotches sleeve I did in 2016, because we were confronted with the same situation back then, as you probably recall. And I showed a beautiful Japanese garden with these swastika-like motifs kind of swarming around it on the outskirts. So again, it was this idea of a kind of a perfect or heroic situation or idyllic situation menaced by developments at the fringes. So I tracked down a font called Blippo, which is clearly the font that they use on the cover of the 1978 album. And it looked very white. I don't know. I kind of liked the plastic on the book, and I couldn't really reproduce the effect of having a plastic cover and making all that kind of shiny texture. It didn't look quite right, but I did post that as the second effort. But also I didn't want to leave the figures just as Keiichi Tanami figures from 1970, whenever it was he did that drawing. So I went to another Keiichi Tanami project he did during the COVID crisis. He got very interested in copying Picasso. He was like everyone else who's trapped at home. And he decided to make his own reproductions, multiple reproductions of many of his favorite Picasso portraits. So there's a good film of him on YouTube of, doing this, collecting these, making an exhibition in New York of these fake Picassos, like a forger. But the variations are kind of the interesting thing, that he doesn't ever quite do the same painting twice. So I decided to give these characters, the superheroes around the table, these Picasso heads instead of the heads they actually have. They have the same bodies, and then I give them these Picasso heads, which I've altered a lot. I kind of erased large parts of the heads and remade them. And then I found this AI program that twisted put little curlicues on the heads as well. So they got taken away from both Keiichi Tanami and from Picasso and became something slightly different. They became these rather effete, almost Dr. Seuss-like characters, I think. So that was sleeve number 2, and it was good as far as it went, but the Blippo type and the 70s look of it was almost overwhelming, and the whiteness was also kind of overwhelming. So one day I was out on my local market here looking at secondhand paperbacks, as is my wont, and I saw this 1974 Brecht Thrapany novel edition from Row, which is the German publisher Rowohlt, and really loved the way somebody had doodled. This is one of my fetishes, as you probably know. If you saw the preliminary sketches for the cover of Niche, for instance, I used a lot of these Reclam editions, which you find in Germany a lot. They've been used as school texts of great literature, German literature, usually Goethe and people. And kids have been bored out of their heads and have just doodled the names of their favourite bands or little spider webs or stuff about their Turkish lives and opening doner kebab shops and, all sorts of things doodled during the class time on these covers. And I really liked that. And I saw that on this Brecht book as well. Somebody had filled in little circles in the insides of the O's. And so this very 70s typography, which I guess... I'm not sure if I really found the exact type, but I think it's something called Capelli Book, or it could be Bunya, or it could be Abandale Bold, or it could be Fashion Fetish, Sally May Medium, Ikuta Sans Bold. These were all typefaces which were in that kind of area, although none of them had exactly the kind of slanted E that I was looking for, the E at a 45 degree. Many things at 45 degrees, actually, including people's arms on this album. But I basically just scanned in the letters from the book itself and then remade them on a new version of the cover, which also uses the background of the book as a texture for the whole thing, giving it a much more kind of worn, vintage look, which, my music also has. I tend to make vintage references and be quite retro and enjoy the wabi-sabi patina of things from the past. Living on a flea market doesn't help. I'm very much drawn to all these old paperbacks, especially from the 70s, a particular era of the mid-70s, I guess, because I was a teenager and I was very receptive back then to graphic design. I wanted to become a designer. Now the only design I do is these sleeves. This one now I think is done. It's finished. It's got a little doodle from Noemi, which she did on a napkin in a cafe called Buddy Buddy of me. It's got these weird creatures around the conference table or whoever they are. And it's got stuff on the inside, Dirk Bogarde, who features very much in the Actorish songs and the songs about facades and things, which emerged towards the end of the recording session. And it's got a picture of me between two spools of a cassette tape from the Eno video, the Life with Eno video. And I'm pleased with it now. I think it works. I don't think I'll go back in and do it again. You never know. Is it as good as Yikes and Ballyhoo? Maybe it is. Maybe it's a little bit too kitschy retro. I don't know. But it took, I think, more time this time because I kept going back and kind of messing with it. But also it just fills me with happiness. I am a frustrated designer and I do approach songwriting as a kind of graphic design. And I do appropriate a lot, reappropriate, recontextualize a lot. So obviously I'm doing that. I'm sampling, in a sense, visually, just as I would be sampling musically, although these days it tends to be more AI sampling than actual sampler sampling. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. I'll go back to being Sir Kenneth Clark and wandering around in Parisian cathedrals.
Open University.
A choice of viewing now. On BBC Two, you can see a test transmission about the diseases spread by mosquito in sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, on BBC One, we present Bob Harris and the Old Grey Whistle Test.
Ruskin said, great nations write their autobiographies in 3 manuscripts: the book of their deeds, the book of their words, and the book of their art. Not one of these books can be understood unless we read the 2 others, but of the 3, the only trustworthy one is the last. On the whole, I think this is true.